Before this video begins, I would like to give a quick thank you to my Asban Team level patrons Fallon Cortez and Nathan Gibson. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Hello everyone and welcome back to another video, this time something a little bit different to usual. Recently on my monthly Patreon exclusive Q&A, someone asked me what I think Series 2 might have been like if Christopher Eccleston hadn't left Doctor Who, and therefore the 9th Doctor hadn't regenerated in the Series 1 finale. This is of course a scenario fans have always speculated on, especially because Eccleston was the one to choose to leave midway through production of Series 1, meaning there may have been some rough plans for a Series 2 with the 9th Doctor if Series 1 had been successful, but then that whole messy and horrible situation happened between Eccleston and the production team. Today I thought it might be fun to take a look at this alternate path of the show, seeing just how different the early years of the first Russell T Davies era would have been if it had been the 9th Doctor instead of the 10th. For the sake of simplicity, I'll be talking purely about narratives, I won't get into things like audience reception or marketing. In terms of some basic rules, I want to give the 9th Doctor the now traditional 3-series era we've come to expect, and I'll also try to keep episodes as close to the originals as possible, but I'll change around episode order and maybe throw in a few new ones here and there where appropriate. So with those basic rules out of the way, it's time to take a ride into the alternate timeline of the 9th Doctor staying after Series 1.
Do you want to come with me?
So to quickly recap Series 1 in case you somehow forgot what happened, Rose Tyler is a normal everyday 19-year-old girl who gets pulled into the life of the Doctor who shows her all of time and space. The 9th Doctor had been around for an unspecified period of time before that series began, but a key part of his backstory is the horrifying unseen Time War, which has left him traumatized and guilty for his involvement in the destruction of his own people. The 9th Doctor and Rose go on a number of adventures together, even meeting a mysterious former time agent named Captain Jack Harkness. There are Slitheen, a bitchy trampoline, and Daleks, with all these adventures culminating in the incredible finale Parting of the Ways. This episode sees the Daleks launch their invasion of Earth, resulting in the death of Captain Jack and Rose looking into the time vortex to become the Bad Wolf entity. This allows her to kill the Daleks and resurrect Captain Jack, although the Doctor is forced to extract the time vortex energy before it can kill Rose. Now, in the actual Series 1, this resulted in the 9th Doctor's regeneration, but we're going to follow the supposedly filmed but never released alternate ending where he's fine, but when they're inside the TARDIS, the scanner flashes up a warning that Rose is dying. And with that cliffhanger, our what if scenario begins. So rather than the 2005 Christmas special being the Christmas invasion, seeing the 10th Doctor's first adventure, we get Christmas on New Earth. The TARDIS makes a rush landing at New York Hospital on Christmas Eve in the year 5,000,000,023. A panicked Doctor bursts out with Rose unconscious in his arms, pleading with the cat nuns to save her. After the opening credits, Rose is in a hospital bed receiving treatment, while the Doctor tries to explore the hospital and interact with its many patients. However, after a reunion with the face of Bo, Rose is suddenly magically fine, healed of her problems and back to her cheery self. This naturally makes the 9th Doctor suspicious of the hospital, and the story then essentially follows the same path as New Earth did, although with a much darker ending between the Doctor and Cassandra, 9 refusing to give the villain a second chance after she stole Chip's body. Since the Doctor didn't regenerate into the happier 10th incarnation, he hasn't entirely healed yet. He still carries a lot of Time War guilt and trauma, along with his quick to anger nature, character traits that dramatically change the dynamics of Series 2. Invasion of the Sycorax would serve as the Series 2 premiere, following the general story of the Sycorax invasion and Harriet Jones authorising their destruction. However, instead of the Doctor being out of commission for the majority of the story, it would be more of a traditional episode, 9 and Rose being brought to the Tower of London to meet Unit and Harriet Jones before the action shifts to the Sycorax ship. Instead of a sword fight, 9 and Rose would work together to outsmart the Sycorax leader, meaning no hand being cut off, changing the events of Utopia and Journey's End later on. A big element of Invasion of the Sycorax would be the character dynamics involved, seeing how 9 and Jackie continue to have an uneasy adversarial relationship, compared to how 10 and Jackie were a lot more friendly in that episode. Jackie, who had been on the Sycorax ship and therefore reacted accordingly to the aliens, would have seen Rose being involved in the climax of the story, and she had realised the effect the Doctor is having on Rose.
She's not Rose Tyler. Not anymore.
Much like the original Series 2, a key story arc would be the developing relationship between the Doctor and Rose. However, instead of this being romantic like 10 and Rose, 9 and Rose would be more platonic, and the focus of the dynamic would be their growing recklessness. After their many adventures, the companion would feel more emboldened and independent, and I think she'd also start to grow a bit darker. Since the 9th Doctor retains his survivor's guilt and bitterness, Rose would pick up on some of his less honourable character traits. She'd no longer be the starry-eyed, everyday, fun girl she was in Series 1. She'd be a harder, more morally grey character to match the 9th Doctor she's travelling with. This would be evident in Episode 2, Empire of the Wolf. Instead of the Doctor and Rose spending the whole time making jokes and a mockery of the situation, their more serious and darker demeanours would scare Queen Victoria, especially upon finding out the Doctor is an alien. She would be more paranoid of him from the get-go due to him not being able to fake a Scottish accent. So the events of the episode would be a lot higher stakes and dangerous, ultimately ending as the Doctor and Rose narrowly save Queen Victoria's life after sacrificing some other characters. This leads to the Monarch setting up Torchwood because the Doctor is such a threat. Now, the reason I chose the original working title of Empire of the Wolf instead of Tooth and Claw is because I like the idea Davis had of Queen Victoria's death causing the creation of a parallel Earth later in the series. Victoria wouldn't die in this Empire of the Wolf, but the parallel Earth would still stem from a timeline where she does die. One of the biggest changes that would take place with the 9th Doctor in Series 2 is the fact that Girl in the Fireplace would have to be completely changed from the ground up, since the 9th Doctor wouldn't exactly be shacking up with Madame de Pompadour. Of course, the entire core of this episode is that relationship between the 10th Doctor and Renette, but I think it could still be solid if the side plot was the goofy Mickey Smith finding himself plunged into this whirlwind relationship with the aristocratic Renette, and he starts to realise he's worth more and doesn't need Rose anymore. He doesn't want to cling on to this failed relationship. World War III showed a decent level of respect between 9 and Mickey, so it would be easy to get him into the TARDIS for a one-off adventure like this, Mickey finally taking the Doctor up on his offer from the end of that earlier episode. The main plot of Girl in the Fireplace would see 9 and Rose exploring the ship, focusing more on the body horror aspects of events, while the spare part Mickey shows he can still be a smart and charismatic hero after all, as he becomes this important person to Renette against the odds. However, his heartbreak after Renette dies causes him to leave the TARDIS at the end of the episode, seeing the Doctor and Rose in a different light and wanting nothing to do with their toxic relationship. This episode would essentially see the end of Mickey's time on the show, the character having completed his journey from zero to hero, whilst also unintentionally taking one more voice of reason away from Rose. Another big change arising from this alternate Series 2 would be how different School Reunion would also be. The main emotional core of that original episode is the relationship between the 10th Doctor and Sarah Jane, but having it be the 9th Doctor completely changes that entire dynamic. Instead of meeting a charismatic and wisecracking incarnation of the Doctor, Sarah Jane would be faced with a more broken, traumatized and hurt incarnation still showing his wounds after the Time War. These are, of course, still underlying characteristics the 10th Doctor also had in Series 2, but they'd be a lot more prevalent due to the personality of the 9th Doctor. Even though he'd have been slowly healing throughout the course of Series 1 and Series 2, this 9th Doctor would most likely see Sarah Jane as more of a painful memory of his pre-Time War past, rather than a fun reunion with an old friend. They still have their touching moments of affection and reconcile over their previous departure, but the 9th Doctor would seem far more alien to Sarah Jane, and she'd have less of a bond with him straight away. He would essentially have to earn her trust back, and this would force him to be more careful about his actions when dealing with the Krillitane. Although Rose would still continue to become more and more reckless. After finally accepting the 9th Doctor and reassuring him that the Time War wasn't his fault, Sarah Jane and K9 would walk off into the sunset for their spin-off show, although not before warning Rose to be more careful on her adventures. Much like in the original Series 2, the Cyberman two-parter would serve as a bit of a mid-series finale of sorts. However, this one would be a lot more dramatic and impactful than the original, seeing the departure of Rose Tyler as a full-time companion and the introduction of her successor. Rise of the Cybermen would open with the Doctor, Rose and Jackie in the TARDIS, the time travellers trying to explain their lifestyle to Jackie, who still doesn't entirely trust the Doctor. Naturally, something then causes the TARDIS to lift off by itself, plunging them into the parallel universe created by an alternate version of Empire of the Wolf. Jackie's counterpart died when Rose's counterpart was still quite young. For convenience, let's just say Rose's counterpart is called Violet, because it's a different type of flower, it just makes things easier. The death of Jackie strained Violet's relationship with Pete and she ran away at 16, 4 or so years before the events of the episode. Since the Doctor naively trusts Rose to not do anything stupid, he decides to try and talk Jackie out of trying to meet Pete Tyler, although this just ends up getting them further involved in the events in a light-hearted way that later gives way to some emotional depth for Jackie, showing us more of her character like we did see in the original series too. Whilst the Doctor and Jackie find themselves caught up in the life of Pete Tyler, Rose meets the Preachers, led by none other than Violet and her second in command, Martha Jones, a combat medic essentially serving as the Jake of the story. Events would largely follow a similar path to the original episode, these two different perspectives of Pete's world playing out as the Cybermen begin to mobilise, with all the action crescendoing at Pete's lavish birthday party. In the process of escaping the party, Pete, who had already been faced with the phantom spectre of his dead wife, is suddenly reunited with Violet, both of whom are shocked that they were communicating with each other this whole time. However, the reconciliation is short-lived, because on the way to Battersea Power Station, Violet finds herself recklessly trying to take on a Cyberman, only to die in front of the Ninth Doctor who failed to save her. This shocks Rose into realising how reckless she herself has become and what the Doctor has turned her into, although they're forced to continue the mission. The Doctor, Martha and Jackie are the ones to infiltrate the power station, whilst Rose and Pete are the ones to deal with the airship. These two teams create the potential for Nine to become more familiar with Martha and be impressed by her, while Rose and Pete are able to grow closer and understand that they're not replacing the dead version of each other, but they can still fill that gap for one another if they try to forge a bond. The solution of switching off the Cybermen's emotional inhibitors would remain intact, but it would be presented in a much darker, less triumphant way. The Ninth Doctor would be absolutely disgusted by Lumic and think of him like Cassandra, someone clinging to life by destroying others. The more morally dubious nature of this solution would be highlighted at the end, where Rose decides she doesn't agree with who the Doctor is anymore. She's no longer blinded by their bond and their adventures. Rather than healing, the Doctor has just made Rose like him, something that would absolutely have happened if 9 hadn't regenerated into 10, whose own relationship with Rose was unhealthy enough. Rose explains that Violet was like looking into a mirror of her potential future, and she doesn't want to travel with the Doctor anymore because it's so bad for her, just like Mickey and Sarah Jane warned her earlier in the series. Instead, Rose decides to stay on the parallel Earth with Jackie and Pete, who have also decided to pursue a relationship, like they did in Doomsday in the original Series 1. The Doctor and Rose part on bittersweet terms akin to Five and Tegan, but he doesn't leave alone because Martha asks to go with him, having nothing left for her in this parallel world. She wants to explore and help others, so the Doctor agrees and they leave together. Instead of Martha's first trip in the TARDIS being the Shakespeare Code or the Idiot's Lantern, I think the best episode for 9 and Martha would be Law of the Jadoon, which is just the French title for Smith and Jones. The episode would by and large be the same general story as the Series 3 opener, obviously with 9 and Martha already travelling together at this point. The story would be a bit more traditional as they get caught up in the events of the hospital without the TARDIS to help them. Martha would use her medical skills to try and help out the scared citizens, while the Doctor would aggressively pursue the Plasmaphore, whom he and Martha were already on the trail of at the start of the episode. Rather than the clever gambit of the 10th Doctor, the 9th Doctor and Martha would find a different way of unmasking the villain, although I'm not exactly sure how that would go down. It would probably also have a little bit of a higher death toll in the actual episode just to show how the 9th Doctor is this more destructive figure and how that will change going forward. Another key change, even if just for the next few episodes, would be the Doctor not replacing his destroy sonic screwdriver, instead electing to go without it for a while because he realises he's growing too reliant on it to fix all his problems. The episode being set on modern day Earth would also allow it to feature a teaser appearance of Torchwood in a significant capacity, with the organisation storming the hospital at the end and demanding the scared patients to give them information about the Doctor and Martha, although the pair would have already escaped by that point. Something that would really benefit from 9 and Martha as a pairing is the companion toning down those more impulsive actions. Rather than being moulded and influenced like Rose was, Martha would challenge the Doctor a lot more and push him to consider the ethical implications of his choices. She'd come to understand the burdens that weigh heavily upon his conscience, and she would be a voice of reason amidst this chaos and trauma, her empathy and pragmatism clashing and softening the Doctor's brooding sense of self-imposed isolation. Much like Rose did with the 10th Doctor, Martha would be 9's path to healing. putting him back on track with the redemption arc he was undergoing in Series 1. As a grounded, practical and more mature companion, Martha would show the Ninth Doctor in a different light in the episodes The Idiot's Lantern, The Impossible Planet Satan Pit, and Fear Her. Rather than bringing out his reckless and dangerous side, Martha would inspire optimism, reminding him of the good in the universe, especially after he blames himself for Rose leaving him. This growing bond, once again platonic, would serve as a beacon of hope in a darker Series 2, and especially in that Impossible Planet 2-parter, with the Ninth Doctor proclaiming his faith in Martha much like Ten did with Rose. They'd be a very efficient and responsible team, bringing out the best in one another and also allowing Martha to exist on her own terms and not be overshadowed by Rose. Much like the original Series 2, the Torchwood and Cybermen storylines would culminate in the finale Army of Ghosts and Doomsday. However, instead of discovering the ghosts through Rose's home life, the Doctor and Martha would stumble upon them in a different way, although they would still end up being brought to Torchwood headquarters. However, without Jackie there to serve as a decoy companion, the Ninth Doctor would have to protect Martha in a different way. Yvonne would insist that he's travelling with Rose Tyler, only for the Ninth Doctor to counter that they can scan the entire planet if they don't believe that she's gone. Keep that in mind for later. As Nine is touring Torchwood, which, absolutely disgusts him, especially due to their loyalty to the British Empire, Martha slips out and finds herself at the Void Ship. Finding it weird that employees seem to recognise her. Things would largely follow the same path, but with even more tension between the Doctor and Yvonne. Although the Doctor would discover Martha's counterpart working for Torchwood, and it would turn out she is one of the victims of the Cybermen. As he realises what's going on, all hell starts to break loose as the familiar Cybermen appear. However, in a shocking reveal, Yvonne's computer chimes to declare a result for Rose Tyler, who reveals herself to Martha much like Mickey did in the original Series 2. However, this surprise is then countered by a bigger return in the form of the Daleks, who obviously represent the Ninth Doctor's journey of guilt and trauma after the Time War, and how those issues are still there even after he thought he'd conquered them. Okay, I just want to quickly preface that this last bit is probably my least favourite part of this video. I think it's a bit too fanfiction-y, but I wrote it in the position of how Russell T Davies would try and approach the finale with the Ninth Doctor rather than the 10th Doctor, and with a different companion to Rose. So please just keep that in mind before you judge how bad this bit might be. Much like its real-life counterpart, Doomsday would see the epic battle of Daleks and Cybermen, but with the added wrinkle of Rose having crossed back over to our universe to fight the Cybermen, having been unable to escape from the warrior's path she was on. The Doctor is taken to Pete's world, where he learns from Pete and Jackie that their planet is dying after the Cybermen escaped. So the Doctor reluctantly agrees to help them, not wanting their planet to die like his own did. Back in our world, Rose seems to be struggling after the appearance of the Daleks, feeling a bit of a burning sensation in her mind and trying to ignore it. When the Doctor finally arrives to face the cult of Skaro, he and Rose can't help but share a touching embrace, although things are still a bit icy between them. The Doctor is once again confronted with the reality of Rose being a soldier, and the lack of the whole Pete-Jackie subplot from the original, which show us a bit more of a balanced and destructive cyber occupation and war with the Daleks. As the battle lines are drawn, Rose falls and accidentally touches the Genesis Arc, activating it whilst also causing her memories of parting of the ways to come flooding back. As the heroes drag themselves back up to the top floor, Martha confirms to the Doctor that Rose is dying. It turns out that Rose wasn't completely cleared of the Time Vortex energy, so the Bad Wolf entity is trying to re-emerge within her and is burning her body up for fuel. Pete and Jackie try to take Rose back with them, but the Bad Wolf entity activates, using its powers to block the Doctor and Martha from reaching Rose. She uses her powers to banish the Daleks and the Cybermen back into the void, using her life force to close the tear in a heroic sacrifice, leaving Pete and Jackie on the other side, wondering what happened to Rose. As the Doctor rushes to the dying Rose's side, Martha saves him from the lingering cyber controller Yvonne Hartman, before Nine and Rose say their goodbyes. The Doctor angrily blames himself, but Rose forgives him and reassures him that this sacrifice was her choice. She asks Martha to look after the Doctor, and then her body burns up in vortex energy, before the epilogue sees Nine and Martha paying respect to their fallen friend, only for the Titanic to suddenly crash into the TARDIS. And on that bombshell cliffhanger, I think that's where I'll leave it. for now. If this video does well, I'll absolutely do a Series 3 version which will continue to deviate even more, but this video was already long enough to make. I know I took a lot of creative liberties, especially towards the end, but I really tried to put myself in the mind of Russell T Davies and how he constructs his storylines, because I wanted to try and keep it as realistic as possible for how a genuine Series 2 of the Ninth Doctor might have looked. Having no consequences for the ending of Parting of the Ways would have been really weird, although having Rose die within like the first episode of Series 2 would have been equally weird. So I thought it'd be most fitting if her consequences came in the finale after her story was finished, you know, making it the most dramatic thing possible. I will admit I'm not too keen on the Bad Wolf entity conveniently saving the day for a second series in a row, but I think it fits within the 2006 TV landscape and keeps things very interconnected, having this character return for a final flourish with higher stakes and more drama, although I still am not a huge fan of how it would overshadow Martha still. I know the Series 2 I pitched in this video would be a lot darker than the one we got, but there'd still be lots of campy elements, and I do think it's important to remember the trajectory 9 and Rose were on before the Doctor regenerated. The 10th Doctor coming in completely changed everything, since if 9 was to have stayed, things would have gotten a lot worse for the relationship with Rose. Of course, even without his regeneration, the 9th Doctor would eventually heal from his Time War guilt, but it would take a lot longer, and I think the emotional beats of a companion change would also help to show that character journey better, along with some kind of changeover being needed to show the new viewers how often the lead actors in the show change, similar to how the real Series 1 did that. I do think it's basically impossible to just like for like swap out the 10th Doctor with the 9th in Series 2, since their characteristics are so different and the series is tailor-made for the 10th Doctor, obviously. Entire episodes would need to be completely rewritten and story arcs moved around a lot, so it's hard to sum everything up in this 20-minute long video, you know, there are so many branching paths and changes. I tried to keep the majority of elements, like Mickey's Zero to Hero arc, Jackie meeting Pete again, and Rose's recklessness alongside the Doctor, because I wanted to stay as faithful as possible to what the direction likely would have been and what the direction actually was in the version we did get. It's not perfect, but I hope I did a good enough job and it didn't come across too much like some kind of edgy Wattpad fanfic. So let me know what you think. Tell me what you think worked and what didn't, or what you would have done instead. I hope you all enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it, and as always, I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye. And I'd just like to quickly thank my Bantam level patrons, Fallon Cortez and Nathan Gibson, my Diamond level patron, Glenna Clark, my Platinum level patrons, Matthew Burns and Maximilian Foreman, and all my Gold level patrons, Boots, Daniel Shillito, Franz Orne aka Lan Vortex, Leigh Marie Farrell, and Tom Azar. Thank you so much for your support.